wonderfully alliterative. I'm going to start with the FinCom roll call for calling to order. Joe McDonough,
Yep, here.
Jeffrey Corum,
Here.
Ed Ross,
Here.
John Sullivan,
Here.
Mark Zero,
Here.
and Joe Carnahan here. So the way that we are structuring the financial forums this year is like this is the one where we're going to talk mostly about things having to do with figuring out the operating budget for this year. This is sort of our preparation for the next FinCom meeting when we actually vote on guidance for use of free cash. So we're going to hear a lot about the town's current financial position, where we are with free cash right now, projected accommodated costs, and things like that. We have talked for a while on FinCom about at least revisiting, maybe not necessarily changing, but at least discussing some of our policies, including the ones on cash reserves and on debt and capital are both obviously relevant to discussions about use of free cash in the budget. We will talk about use of free cash in the budget, and we'll talk about our next financial forum, which is going to be at the end of October. And that one, the main things that we know of so far is probably going to be talking about the big projects, Killam, Recal, and we can talk more when we get to that in the agenda about what we want to talk about that. And then we have the part that's actually more like a finance committee meeting with liaison reports, picking a representative to school department screening committee, and reviewing minutes. So we have so first thing on the agenda after me saying hi is public comment. So people, I see Mark Doxer. Go ahead.
Please, thanks, folks. Thanks, members of the Finance Committee. Good evening, everyone.
Sorry, pause for a second.
Before he says anything, you have 3 select board members on the call.
Oh, thank you. We got
Chris Haley's on the call, so don't get yourself in trouble, Mark.
Wait, hold on. Who's the third? Oh, Karen is here.
I think
Thank
Chris
you.
is on.
We have two on the, yes, we have two on the call and one in the room, so you're right. So, sorry, I think I have to give the vice chair a chance to call, to call to order.
So let's call the select board to order.
I think you need to do a roll call.
Okay, people on Zoom, could you say yes?
Here.
Select board member, great.
it's-
Mark is here.
And Chris is
And Chris is here, and Karen isn't present in the room. Thank you.
All right, thanks. Good catch, Tom, thank you. All right, yes, now, just in time. Mark, please continue.
Thanks, Joe. Thanks, everybody. So I know that this evening you have a lot on the agenda to talk about, in particular thinking about free cash is part of the discussion, and I know specifically on the agenda is to talk about the use of free cash to support the operating budget. I'd like to suggest and ask that the Finance Committee soon take up another possible use of free cash. And specifically what I'm thinking about is that free cash has always been viewed as a little bit of a balancing mechanism, but more, it had 2 big purposes in my view. One is kind of the safeguard in case things go wrong. And the second is that if there are very worthy capital projects that can't be financed in other ways, to give consideration to using some free cash for that. So what I'd like to ask folks to start thinking about is the possibility of using probably $4 to $5 million of free cash toward capital, not in this fiscal year, but going forward. And Joe, you mentioned we're going to have potentially multiple big projects coming forward to town meeting and then potentially to the voters, both the Reading Center for Active Living and the Killam School. The notion of using a reasonable chunk of free cash could be a financing mechanism for those capital projects. So again, I'm thinking probably in the $4 to $5 million range, but I'm just kind of ballparking with that. But I think that would be a very good use of free cash. It's all one-time use of those funds toward very durable assets for the town. And the net effect would be that it could lower the requirements for borrowing as a result. So I wanted to bring that forward as something that I would ask that the town start thinking about, that the Finance Committee think about, and then perhaps as motions are going to town meeting for the warrant in April, that might be something we're thinking about as well. So thank you for the time.
Thank you, Mark. Anyone else who would like to make a comment? All right, let's move on. I think, pass it over to, Sharon to talk about the town's current financial position.
Thank you, Joseph. Can you hear me?
Yes. Yes.
I'm going to apologize in advance. I have some sort of cold or allergies going on, so better safe than sorry. I'm upstairs, just to be sure that I don't get anybody else. So I'm going to share my screen. Can you see that screen?
Yes. Yes.
Is it very small?
Yes.
Let's see if I can make it any bigger. Does that help at all?
Maybe.
Can you see it at all?
Yes, we certainly see it all. I think it's I'm the wrong person to ask. I still have fairly good vision.
All right, so let's see.
How are you guys doing over there?
See if I go to 175.
You're the furthest away, that's why I asked.
All right, how about that? Any better?
That's better. It's definitely better. Thank you.
The reason I'm going to show you this first is I have good news and bad. The good news is, based on my calculations, uncertified, I feel like free cash is going to go up by 600,000, which means that we regenerated everything we used, which I think is fantastic. The bad news is this. This financial forecast is right now set to a 3.5% operating budget, and I've got nothing in there for free cash. This negative number down here, these bolded numbers, this is how much free cash would be needed each year to support a 3.5% operating budget. So you can see that's almost 5.8 million in fiscal 26, and that's if it's a 3.5, and then 7.12 million in fiscal 27, 8.6 in fiscal 28, and almost 10.3 in fiscal 29. And I bring that up because our regeneration of the last 5 years has been just under $6 million. So these numbers coming in the future are kind of higher than our average regeneration. And our regeneration could start to increase, who knows? But I think that we should be aware and be making the public aware that the override we did that was supposed to be 3 to 5 years is starting to show that we're going to need it in the next couple of years at least. Somewhere in the next few years we will want to think about it because these free cash numbers are exceeding our regeneration that we have on average for the last 5 years. And the reason I concern myself with that so much is because I don't know that we'll regenerate at the $6 million level because interest rates are falling if they're going down. And one of the bigger, when we get into the presentation, one of the bigger regeneration factors we have is investment income. It's been coming in way higher than what we project. And so I think $2.8 million in fiscal 24 came solely from interest income, interest and investment income. So if those numbers can't be relied upon, it's hard to know, will other things come up that will help us? Like maybe people will, interest rates will fall and people will be able to buy cars and we'll see motor vehicle come up. But it's really just hard to know. And we do have a somewhat conservative budgeting style. We don't like to be overly optimistic with our revenues. And so this model is showing you kind of realistic numbers for revenues, realistic percentages for increase for each one of them. And those are the numbers we're looking at for 3.5%, which is a very typical budget for us. And I just wanted us to be thinking about that because I felt like it was very telling to take the free cash out and see what the numbers would be. So I figured I would start there just to give you guys some thoughts. I mean, we do regenerate every year some level of free cash, and it's been on the high side. But now that inflation is coming down, will those revenues be generated at that level? I'm not sure. So that's where I'm kind of cautious and want to just make us all think about when is it that we're going to need an override.
Sharon, Mark's got a question. I have a question too, but I'll Mark go
Sharon,
first.
is the projected FY25, is that the original budget or is that your forecast?
That's the budget, the forecast, yeah.
So that doesn't include any of the interest then? that we're realizing
No,
for the
but
audit?
you'll see in my later slides, I'm gonna show you what I see as, the regeneration on the revenue and expense side.
Yeah.
I'm just being cautious, I don't want, we're gonna be voting on these big projects, and I don't want people to say that we didn't mention that this is coming soon too, and that's, I just wanna make sure. I mean, every year that we regenerate what we use, it buys us probably another year that we don't have to think about it, and this year we did regenerate everything we used. But these numbers that I'm looking at are larger than any regeneration I've seen, the $7, $8, $10 million. It's hard to imagine that there'll ever be numbers like that. So we would start to see free cash go down, and it's a matter of where would we be comfortable in terms of that free cash number being when we decide to ask for an override? Like, what is our baseline? So just to be starting to think about that conversation. Not ideal, but I figured I would share that just because it was very telling to me when I took the numbers out and I'm looking at them, wow. It's a lot of free cash. So, yeah,
Sorry.
do you have a question?
So I have a question. I see Karen has a question, but I think I'm actually ahead of you in line, so I'm going to go ahead. Which is, so the amount of free cash being used just to do a 3.5% budget increase is going up by way more than 3.5%. It's like 36% increase year over year with the 3.5% projection just for FY25 and so forth. So it's
You
so
wanna
the
know what's
question
driving
is,
that?
so yeah, exactly. What's driving that? And I assume it's something in accommodated
There's
costs.
several things, but first I would say that accommodated costs over the last 2 or 3 years have not been well behaved. And when I show you accommodated costs, they'll appear well behaved, but they're not, because over the last couple of years, excluded debt is falling off the rolls and making it look like it's a tame number. I feel like accommodated cost is gonna say 3.4, but really, if I took that debt exclusion out of the mix, it's closer to 5.7% increase in accommodated costs, which is not at all what we're used to. We're used to keeping that number under 3%. In the last 3 years, it's, in the inflationary market, we've seen those numbers skyrocket on us, making it much more difficult to get an operating budget that's typical without more free cash.
So I'm looking at the breakdown of accommodated costs and just looking at individual rows because I know the total is confounded by the excluded debt falling off. I guess.
I think my presentation, like when I put the PowerPoint up, it will give you more details that will help you get to, this is kind of summarized here, but I wanted to show you the financial forecast because a 3.5% operating budget is considered a pretty typical budget for us. The last few years, we've done 4% because inflation has forced up so much of the cost. And so the numbers are quite high, and I just wanted to make sure we are aware of that.
Yeah, I see that. Karen, you were next. Oh, and then Ed.
Thank you for teasing that out, with the debt coming off and the accommodated costs actually going up more per year. Appreciate that. And I'm just wondering, has any of the additional revenue specified by the millionaire's tax, which is overfunded at the moment, hit our books yet? Or is that
I'm
coming?
sorry, I couldn't hear what you said, Karen, I'm sorry.
Maybe if you're at the podium, you'll probably be,
Oh.
mics will pick you up better, I
Okay.
suspect.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you, sorry about that.
Okay, sorry about that. No, thank you for teasing out the accommodated costs, being disguised a little bit by the debt. And I'm wondering if any of the revenues, the increased revenues we'll be getting from the state for the millionaire's tax have hit yet? Or is that coming up in this fiscal year?
So I know that in fiscal 25, the state numbers that I'm showing for state revenue include some increases relative to like the school piece. But in fiscal 26, any of the numbers I have is just a 2.5% increase over what we have currently. So we don't know. It's just too soon to say what those numbers are going to be.
Okay,
For fiscal 26 anyway. Fiscal 25 does include the final numbers that I'm getting on the cherry sheet for state aid.
Okay, because that fund is overfunded and they have a nice problem to figure out how to get it back out to the communities. So that's at least something that should be continuing in the next few years. Thanks.
Okay.
Ed, did you have a question?
Thanks, Joe. Thanks, Sharon. So this question is probably a little bit for you and maybe probably a little bit more for Matt. But as we start, projecting this out, and I know there's some things that we'll need to do on our side to look at what levels of free cash, working our way backwards to a threshold where we start to think about overrides and things of that nature. But conversely, how does that work in parallel? I mean, when we're looking at overrides, we're looking to changing the top line. How do we start to look at, the decisions that we make to be able to, whether it's cuts or things on that side? Like, it would be great to be able to, and I know we don't know this now, but like, it would be great to understand as we go through this from a projections perspective, what we're exploring, to be able to, kind of, to the extent that we can, rein in costs and what things that we need to be able to cut. And those are, because I think those are powerful things to be able to share, kind of as you move forward with whatever we present back to the constituency.
Certainly something that we can discuss. I will say that the biggest piece of our budget is our salaries, and a lot of them are union negotiated contracts. And so during the negotiations, most of these union contracts were higher than what we typically see because of inflation. So that's going to be a hard area. You have obligations in terms of union contracts. The easy cut is some sort of, salary, some kind of layoffs or, reductions in that way, or expense side reductions. But some things can't be really reduced. It's really like utilities, debt, all those things are kind of etched in stone, so to speak. There's very few, the salaries are the biggest piece of the budget. And so the only ones that are kind of negotiable at this point for fiscal 26 are their non-union staff. So the only other way you could bring down any of these expenses in terms of the salaries is some sort of reduction in staff.
And kind of following on that, if I can, Joe, another question is just, as we kind of go through this, is there, I know we're fairly conservative as far as how we project out revenues, but is there anything that we can start to forecast as it relates to new growth or anything that, that does, I know we've been driven lately by investment income, but is there, kind of anything in there from a new growth perspective that actually, helps mitigate that? And again, these are all kind of questions I think that we're going to need to be able to understand so that because I do think that we need to, and I think, Sharon, I think you're spot on. We need to start to communicate, and I don't know if it's a 5-year plan or whatever the number is, but I think we need to start to work our way back, especially as, for capital projects, we're going to, to the voters for that piece of it. I think as we communicate, we'll need to know that. And so I think, the more that I think about it, I think it's probably helpful to be able to start to circle some possible, like, okay, well, this is when we reach a threshold, kind of a point of no return, if you will, where we need to be able to start to either make tough decisions on either side, whether it's on cuts or if it's on, overrides, things of that nature. So I think, even as we're looking towards this next financial forum, I think I think that would be helpful, to be able to have some of that. I think, that's not something that you can under communicate, in my opinion.
Would you like me to proceed with the PowerPoint that I prepared?
If there
That'd be
are no
helpful,
other
yeah.
questions, I'm just looking around to make sure I'm not missing anybody. By the way, for purposes of the select board minutes, I do see Carla Bacci joined. Welcome. All right, so select board's already called to order. We already had a quorum there, so. All right, so Sharon, please continue.
Okay. So this first slide here just kind of gives you an overview of what we're going to discuss, the revenues, the free cash. I was asked to make a slide of other revenues that might be available for for transfer into the general fund or for capital projects or whatever that might be, accommodated costs, and then different operating budget scenarios and how much free cash they would require. And then we have the FinCom policies like, as you mentioned, we'll discuss, and there'll be some discussion about free cash usage, and then agenda items for the financial forum number 2 on October 30th. And then, of course, approve the minutes and closing remarks. So this is the projected revenues for fiscal 24 through fiscal 26, and you'll notice in fiscal 24, revenues were 3.96 before free cash use, and then in fiscal 25, they dropped to 3.22, and that is the result of seeing the excluded debt go down by like 50%. And then you see that the revenues in fiscal 26 look like they're only up 2.43%. And that is because the final debt payment on the library is being paid off and we have no more excluded debt. And as you know, when it comes to excluded debt, the taxpayer agrees to pay the additional, above the Prop 2.5, the additional amount needed for debt service on those debts. And once those debts are paid, that extra revenue goes away as well. So it doesn't help our budget. So for fiscal 26, we have property tax revenues going up 2.2%, which is much lower than normal. And again, that has to do with that excluded debt. Normally it's about 3 to 3.2%. 3.6 is from our baseline levy and an increase of 13.9% new growth, although I haven't gotten a final number on new growth yet from Victor. I'm expecting to hear any day now. Excluded debt going down 100% because we do not have any more excluded debt in fiscal 26, and then our abatements going up 2.5%. Other local revenues are up 4.5%. State aid, we have an agreement that we just projected at 2.5% because we never quite know what state aid is going to be when we start our budgeting process, with an understanding that if there's a significant shortfall that FinCom would support the use of free cash if needed. And then in the other available area, 3.7% increase, and the majority of that has to do with indirect costs being charged to the water, sewer, and stormwater for people who work on the town side that help execute their work. And then, of course, free cash is to be determined. So these are our reserves. I'm estimating free cash is not certified yet, so this number could be off. But my calculation is that free cash will come out at $20,075,351. And that is an estimate. It could be a little higher, a little lower based on, because the one thing I've told you in the past is we tend to wait till after September 30th to have free cash certified, because any deficits that we have in any of the grant accounts are deducted from our free cash. Unless we've collected the money by September 30th. And most of it we do collect, and so that number could go up, it could go down if they find something that I didn't realize I needed to deduct. But that's my estimate of free cash. General fund stabilization, just under $2 million, and then of course your reserves of $200,000, giving you about $22.22 million, which is 18.1% of our revenues for fiscal 26. Here's our regeneration for fiscal 24 in the revenues area, $4.58 million of regeneration. And that you can see that $2.8 million is solely from investment income. Property tax that came in 446 over projection, and that's basically less abatements than we had projected. Motor vehicle excise 414 over, meals tax 134 over, delinquent taxes 331 over, and then miscellaneous items adding up under 100,000 to 196. And then we had also FEMA money come in for the pandemic, final money that we've been owed for a couple years of 259,000 that was due to the general fund because the expenses appeared in the general fund budget. So the items in green, I'm saying, are potentially sustainable. And the items that are black with the stars, not entirely sure. We're not really sure where investment income will come in. I don't know that it will be as high as what we're seeing there. And so I didn't want to put it under mostly sustainable. It's not likely to be that high. But like I said, you just never know. Interest rates go down and then people feel like they can buy things like cars. Maybe motor vehicle excise will come up. It's hard to know for the future years. So 0.99 million is mostly sustainable, 3.59 is questionable. For fiscal '24 for expenses came in 2.43 million under budget. 1.39 million is from the accommodated cost areas, electricity, natural gas, some capital projects. I made some adjustments to electricity and natural gas, just seeing that we were under. But natural gas, I think you recall, last year went up 30% in May and June. But we still had a little buffer. I took a little bit out of accommodated costs because, as I said, most of the accommodated costs are very high increase in percentage over what we've seen in the past. The schools are turning back about 83,000, and the town side has 0.96 or just shy of $1 million. Within the public services, DPW and public safety, 671,000 from vacancies due to retirements or attrition. So for time that positions remain open while we would look for a replacement. And then the other departments within the town, 166, and then 120 from various expense accounts. So these are some of the other funds that I was able to locate that we have in the past used to help us in our operating budget here and there. One of them is sale of real estate, but there's only about 47,541 in there. We usually only use that fund for purchasing land or capital purchases. The Reading Ice Arena, we used to use this fund. This is rent coming in from the ice arena, and it used to be a regular revenue coming into our general fund budget when I first started, and then when the ice arena needed a lot of capital work, they started to give us the heads up that they wouldn't be turning over as much, and so we stopped relying on it. And so over the years, as they started to return more money to us, it's accumulated to about 489,000. As mentioned in the prior slide, the stabilization fund doesn't have any restrictions. The Reading Ice Arena could be used for whatever we want. And then the smart growth stabilization is for capital only. And then we do have the sped stabilization fund that we established a couple of years ago for unanticipated sped cost.
Ed's got a question. Go ahead.
Sharon, I just actually back 2 slides, and this is probably just more of a request. I don't think this is something you might be able to rattle off your head, but when we look at the 24 FY24 expenditures, and we were 2.43 million under budget. Do we know how often those expenditures are under budget, and at what percentage that those are, kind of historically? And the reason for my question is that, again, getting back to the, kind of earlier conversation about, kind of free cash use, is there a certain, is it fair and logical to be able to look at that as another lever, like whatever we project as a budget, there's a certain amount of expenditure we just never hit. And I know it's, every year it's a little bit different as far as what those components are, whether it's, filling positions or, other things, but it's just trying to think, that's probably another piece to the puzzle that would be good for us to understand.
Yeah, every year the regeneration areas are different.
Yep.
And obviously we're building a budget well in advance of when it actually happens. So there definitely is some areas where you have unanticipated extra in there. And sometimes we move it around within the budget in April if there are needs. And most of these aren't what I'd consider large numbers under accommodated costs. It's just that so many of them had numbers that it really added up. In most years, a lot of the numbers are coming from open positions, usually, because it takes us so long to hire, especially in places like public safety where if somebody retires and they're, at the higher level, usually that's a promotion from within. And so they go through the process and they hire that position, and then it vacates another position, and then they have to spend all this time filling that. And so I feel like in general, on the town side, there's almost always a certain level of town salaries that seems fairly consistent because we tend to have turnover or retirements, and these positions may remain vacant for a period of time, adding up to savings. But it's hard because we build our budget bottom up, person by person, how much do we need to pay for these positions? And it's hard to know, what you'll have for, attrition savings or retirement savings when you're building a budget this far in advance.
I just trying to figure out if there's a way to be able to, kind of conservatively forecast that, if it's possible.
You want to continue? Go for it.
So here we have the accommodated cost, and as I said to you, they're 3.4% up, which sounds like a fairly tame number, but it's really more like 5.6% up if you took out the excluded debt going down. Benefits are up 9.2% in fiscal 26 and another 7.8% in fiscal 27. Capital is going down by 0.5% and then up 10.9% in fiscal 27. The debt includes the excluded debts, which showing a number of 29.3% reduction and then 3.6% in fiscal 27. Energy just 1.1%. As I said, I tweaked those numbers based on the regeneration I saw in fiscal 24, and then 3.3% in fiscal 27. The financial is pretty stable at 0.4% increase and 2.4% in fiscal 27. Out of district special ed is up 4.6%. There's quite a bit of, we've been doing 4% over the last few years, and then 3.8% we have projected for fiscal 27. The education vocational school is up 13.3%. As you recall, one of our schools is doing a school building project, and more of that debt is becoming charged to us in fiscal 26. I think it was $160,000 above and beyond the tuition for the students at that Voc school. And in fiscal 26, it's like $270 just for the capital for the debt. And then you have whatever the tuition is for the students. So that 13.3, that hurts. And then 3.9 going forward. Miscellaneous and community priorities is 11.5 and 6.6. So this is the benefits broken down in a little bit more finite detail. So I said it was 9.2, and you can see that the heavy hitters within the group are retirement, which is 8.3 for the next couple of years, and health insurance, where we've been enjoying very low increases over the last, I'd say, 7 to 8 years. We are being told by Maya to be projecting a 7 to 10% increase, and we've kind of been very close to the number each year, exhausting any little buffer that might be there. So we only turned back about $120,000 out of health insurance, so there's not a lot of buffer built into that number. So I went with an 8.5% number somewhere in the middle, as we're being told 7 to 10% is going to be the norm. And then Medicare, Social Security, 2% in each year, and then police, fire, indemnification, 4% and 3.8%. The projected capital, we're showing a 12.8% reduction between capital and debt together, 0.49% reduction in capital for fiscal 27, and as I said, 10.9 increase in fiscal 27. The debt inside the levy is down 3.7, but then the excluded debt is completely eliminated by 100%. So that $1.28 million going away makes this accommodated cost look much more tame than it really is. This is our 5-year free cash analysis, and then you can see the top line gives you what free cash is certified at. Obviously, fiscal 24 is an estimate because we haven't certified yet. Revenues over budget, expenses under budget are part of our regeneration number. And then how much free cash we use each year. So the last couple of years, we've used over $6 million. So we're very lucky to have the number going up. We were able to regenerate more than that. I think we regenerated a little over $7 million this year, which is not typical. In that other adjustment to free cash, that's where we would have any money that was brought forward from prior years for POs. If we close them with a balance, that goes to free cash. And then that's netted against any deficits that we have in state grants that are being deducted from free cash, because it's as if they borrowed the money from the general fund. So this is
Sharon, I have
what.
Sharon, we have a question here. Go ahead, Karen.
Sharon, on that last slide, so would it be possible to start including the stabilization fund, which is just under $2 million, whenever we talk about our free cash analysis?
I mean,
From a psychological
free cash all by itself. Up on the first slide, I do give you free cash plus stabilization and so you pull on reserves. When we do the chart for the town meeting warrant, we normally will show all the reserves, including the stabilization. So you're saying you'd like to see this slide with stabilization funds built into it as well?
Well, I'd open that to the group because it's not a source of funds that we ever spend. We've never gotten to that point, and yet it's not an insignificant amount of money. So while, we need to be prudent and make sure we're not at the cliff, when we're just looking at plain free cash numbers, we're not really seeing where the edge of the cliff is. The cliff has another $2 million, so, that, I'd maybe like to see that included more because, correct me if I'm wrong, if there was zero in the free cash balance and we needed to spend money, we would go and get it from the stabilization fund, that's
sure.
what it's for.
I think I was thinking that when I put it in this slide back here, that we included in the percentage of reserves that we have. So we typically show it this way because that slide I showed you kind of shows where we were certified in what areas we generated free cash. This slide here shows you where we are with free cash and other types of reserves that we consider to be kind of unrestricted, which is the general fund, stabilization fund, and so we typically will show you this slide. I can change it and include it. I mean, I definitely show the charts in the town meeting warrant book with stabilization funds included. So we do actually show, I think I gave you guys in the packet, and I'll show it after, like a tool that you've been using to help you figure out how much free cash will go down based on different numbers of regeneration, and it includes the stabilization funds as well. So when do we hit that mark of 7% that we strive for? And in that spreadsheet includes everything, just so that we, it's including stabilization and free cash so that people know, okay, when are we going to get to this danger zone where we're not going to be able to stay above the 7%?
Okay, thank you. I think that's really important that stabilization is always shown as part of that 7% for now. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
I'd like to just respond to that point because I'm looking at the spreadsheet that Sharon is referring to. It's what I've spent most of my time on actually so far in this meeting on my screen here. And yeah, that does, this is the free cash analysis 10-year projection.
It's in the package.
Okay, so there's a, okay, yes. The,
Sharon, it's a few slides ahead if you want.
oh, there is, yeah, that one's got the 3, but yeah, this is
Oh, well,
sufficient
this is
for
my
you to-
PowerPoint, so I don't, I know it's
okay.
in your packet a few slides
Yes,
ahead, but I was gonna open up the actual Excel file and show it. But I wanted to go over this slide and then I was gonna do it after.
But yeah, that's the so just to pick an example with a 3.5% operating budget increases in FY 25 and 26 and 3% thereafter and 4 million regeneration, that still puts us under 7% of reserves, including the stabilization fund in 2028. So yeah. All right.
It all really matters what our regeneration numbers each year are, but when we're projecting them, we're very conservative. I mean, I usually start with 2.5 or $3 million, and that's usually a safe number. We've been seeing an average 6 million over the last 5 years. That doesn't mean that it will continue, so we try and go with a number that we think for sure that we will get. So this slide here is just talking about what level of an operating budget we will get with the different levels of free cash. And it's a lot of free cash to get to even a small level of, a 2.5% is a very low budget for us, and at 4% it's a $6.2 million ask. So that's something to consider. What I was thinking I would do at this point is bring up those slides so people could see how they work if they don't recall, so that when you guys are thinking about what the potential use of free cash would need to be, you'd be able to know how to plug in numbers, to see when we drop below the 7% minimum. Would you like to see that now?
That'd be great. Please. Oh, Joe McDonough has a hand up. Sorry, just noticed that.
Yes, sorry, Sharon, I think I know the answer, but like back to the increase in healthcare insurance, we don't have any levers there, right? You said like it's going up 7 to 10%. Like we're
They
kind
tell
of
us
locked
to
in.
budget 7 to 10%. That doesn't necessarily mean it will come in there, but just to be safe, that we're not going to have a shortfall on that line, they tell us 7 to, and we tend to be on the lower end of the estimates typically. I think he said the same thing last year, and I think it was 5.3%. And so, but he definitely is pointing us to health insurance rates being on the rise, and that strongly suggesting a 7 to 10 going forward.
Okay, and remind me, like, how does that work? Is that something like, can we renegotiate or like work?
The public, we have a committee that has a member from every one of the unions, including the town manager on it, and we sit with the Meyer representative and we negotiate things about like the split between the town and the employee, how much the town pays, and there's a lot of things negotiated in those meetings to help try and find ways to save money. So if you recall a few years back when we had Bob here, he had done a negotiation with PEC where we got anybody who was over age 65 into Medicare, and we helped them pay any penalties or premiums they needed to pay to get in there, because that put them now on our supplemental plan, our MedX plan, as opposed to our regular Blue Cross Blue Shield plan. And then the people who remained on our Blue Cross Blue Shield plan were a younger demographic, and so our rates were much improved by that. So anytime there's a trigger or something that we can pull to try and like keep these rates down, we have been. And Maya has worked well with us trying to identify some of those triggers. I'm not sure what they are at this point, what more we can do to keep them down, but we've kept them down at very, very low rates for a very long time. I don't know how many more triggers we're gonna have.
Okay, great, thank you.
Next I see Mark.
Thanks, Sharon. Could I ask a question before you dig into the expenses, the revenue side? I was working in the background. I'm trying to understand how property tax revenues can only be up 2%. So I was looking at slide 4, and I'm wondering if maybe the baseline number there isn't right. It just seems like with 2.5% increase plus new growth, it should be going up more than 2.2%. And I know we don't have the benefit of.
Do you have it? Are you seeing it on the screen? Did I share it?
It is not
Nothing.
currently.
Slide
It's this slide right here, I think he means, right?
I'll go back to
Slide
it so you
4.
can see.
I think it was slide 4.
Yep.
So the issue that is cut, can you see it now?
Yes.
All right, so let's get back to that slide. So it's 2.2%, but you've got to understand that excluded debt goes down 100%. There was a $1.28 million number there last year. And once that excluded debt goes away, so does the money that comes in to pay for it. So the taxpayer agrees to pay excluded debt, whatever the additional debt service is above and beyond the 2.5% that our levy can go up, until the debt is paid off. Once that debt is paid off, the money goes away, the expense goes away, but so does the money, and it makes our numbers look wonky.
Yeah.
Because it's a large number coming off the top. It's a $1.28 million was there in fiscal 25, and then it goes to a 0. And that's how it makes it look like our revenues aren't going up in a way that's realistic. And it's just because the excluded debt is being included there, and it is.
Yeah, no, I see that part. So are the numbers underneath that property tax of 90.69, are those additive? In other words, should those add up to 90.69?
They should, unless I made a mistake in typing them.
So I think maybe the baseline number is wrong.
90 plus 1 is gonna be 91.
Let me look at my financial forecasting. Maybe
Yeah.
I worked that one out myself. Very proud.
So I think it's more like 90, those numbers I think add up more like to 92 million or so.
It looks like the baseline number might not be right.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering.
Yeah,
Sorry,
it does look
I
like
was,
90.48 is a 3.6, and then 1 point, let's see where,
That's 91 already.
oh, but also you have to keep in mind, oh, I'm sorry, I did it the other way. The abatements are being deducted, so that should probably be.
that's a negative.
That's what it is. So it's 90.49, 1.03, and the 0.82 is what we expect to be abated, and so that gives us the 90.69.
I thought we were gaining. We're
The
not
negative is missing.
losing.
So you
All
were
right.
picking it up, good catch.
I thought I found $2 million, sorry.
I wish it was that easy, but no. All right, so I'm gonna stop sharing this.
And,
Is there any more questions as I move to the free cash analysis? Oh, it looks like Chris Daly
yes,
has-
Chris, please.
Thanks, Joe, and thanks, Sharon. Just a couple questions before you moved on. So you mentioned the override scenario, which I haven't heard mentioned probably ever in future context as opposed to the past. So when are you anticipating that something like that would start happening, or are we talking in 2027 or 2035? Or what are you forecasting for that?
I mean, it looks to me like we're gonna start to see free cash go down after fiscal 27. So I think in fiscal 27, we should be planning probably for fiscal 28 to be I mean, we could do it at any time, but where Killam is on the agenda and the senior center, it might not be the best time. It's up to FinCom where they're most comfortable. But you will start to see if we have to use $7 million of free cash, if we don't regenerate at that level, we will start to see the number go down. We have had very healthy regeneration numbers, but what scares me is that the numbers that we're approaching are higher than our 5-year average for regeneration. And that's where, and we could be surprised again. I could come out and tell you fiscal 26, we regenerate everything again. And it's very difficult to know with so many numbers in flux, especially that investment income, knowing that those numbers are going to go down. And that's been beating that $6 million for the last 3 years.
All right, and then on the Burbank fund that you had 489,
Yep.
is that where we can actually use all of that, or do they have their own budget cut off at like 200 grand, so it's really 289, or?
No, that's funding that's turned over to us that can be used for whatever we, with town meeting vote, whatever we want to use it for.
Okay. And then the trash slide in there said it was down 144K, I think I saw. So what is that taking into account when I see minus 144 under budget?
That just means that the budget that we had was over by, there was a little buffer in the number because we increased it by a percentage, not knowing, what our tonnage is going to be. And so tonnage is going to play a role in that as well. So there's always a little bit of buffer when it comes to things that are going to be, variable in terms of how much tonnage we have for recycling, for rubbish, for removal. All of that plays into it. And so we conservatively try to project that, and then it's reasonable to imagine that some of that gets turned back if the numbers are conservative that we're projecting.
So does that take into account our trash contract itself plus the overages that we might have?
So we have 2 contracts. One's for disposal of the trash and the pickup of the trash. One is actually expiring at the end of this year, and the other one is expiring the end of 26, I believe. So this would be just our experience from fiscal 24, and our contract is still kind of solid at that whatever rate we had, a very low and very good rate that we've had for a long contract for Kumbata, and I think we have Republic for the other. So we have a very, very favorable contracts for rubbish, and we are looking at those going away and seeing those numbers go up significantly, and that's part of what's making accommodated costs look as bad as it is into future years, because those numbers, anything we've gotten from Republic as proposals have been very high numbers. We're definitely going to have to, do some sort of bid for our rubbish to see if we can get better rates, because they were not attractive at all. Any proposal that they've sent us to try and get us to sign early has not been anything we would want to entertain.
Yeah, that's mainly why I was bringing this up, because I saw obviously examples which hopefully are on the higher end. And those do not favor negative anything in any of these calculations other than us losing significantly.
Yeah, so I mean, I think it's a lot of just what we projected for tonnages as opposed to what actually happened. And so there's some buffer in the number a little bit to make sure that we have enough in our budget, and that's what you're seeing as a turn back.
Yeah, so as long as there's an asterisk or something for you in the future as a placeholder reminder that we're gonna get hosed in future years.
Oh, you definitely will see that I've got numbers that are pretty big in the accommodated cost for rubbish, because it's an unknown to me right now. And the proposals they've sent us are not good at all. Numbers that I don't think could be afforded, so yeah, it's hard to know. We will be adjusting accordingly as we get those numbers.
And hypothetically, if we couldn't afford them, what does that mean? Like the override happens quicker than you thought, or like we start cutting staff the next
I
day?
think that's why you do a competitive bid process to get a better rate. Like I don't think we just accept a contract with if you know, whether or not we have to go for a bid process or not, we probably would if we're not getting rates that we feel are what we deserve.
Thank you.
I saw your question, Jeffrey, but just following up on that line of questioning, I do see when the accommodated costs are broken out in detail, a projected 20% increase in the rubbish line for FY26. So, yeah, ouch.
Yeah, and until I know what a real number is, I have to go with numbers that are on the higher side. I mean, we've been seeing I want to say some of the proposals we saw from Republic were in the 30s or 40% increases. I'm like, this does not motivate us to want to do anything with this right now. We're locked in at a good rate, and we're going to see that through and then go through a bid process to try and get a more competitive rate.
Okay, I think Jeffrey was next in the queue.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. It took me a second to go back and look, but there was on the regeneration, we had an amount going back for snow and ice, and I was just looking back, so of 113,000. In the warrant in the spring, we approved an additional 75,000 for snow and ice because I thought the budget was running over, and that's why we needed it. And then I see 113 coming regenerated. So can you explain what happened there? Did we ask for more than we didn't even need?
Sometimes we ask for more for snow and ice if the numbers are starting to get close and we're not sure if we're done with the snow. And so just to be safe, to make sure that we don't end up in a deficit, we will ask for it knowing that it will go back to free cash if we don't need it.
So is that, if we got 112 back or 113 back, is that including the $75,000 that we approved extra? Okay, so we were like $40,000 under.
So it was really tight. Without that, would have been really tight. And if we'd had any, I mean, and even in April, when we're approaching April town meeting, you know, I've seen storms happen on April 1st. You know, so we err on the side of caution and ask and turn it back if it's not needed.
Okay, thanks.
Quorum for school committee is 4?
Or was 4, there's only 3 of us right now.
Yep.
Thank you.
Just checking. Yeah. All right, Ed.
Sharon, just to go back to Chris's question around trash, the fact that you baked in your projections and for accommodated cost, that those numbers were baked into the free cash use that you had in the out years. I'm sure there's a lot of drivers, but that was another main driver as far as why there's more free cash use in the out years, correct?
Yeah, I mean, if the numbers come up to be better than expected, it's going to help our use of free cash in future years. But with the unknown, you have to be conservative, and we're going with a higher number than we expect. But I don't know, it could even be higher than what I've got there.
No, yeah, I just want to,
What we see from Republic have not been encouraging.
No, yeah, I just want to be able to kind of put a bow on that like, you know, that's one another reason why, you know, we're seeing dwindling potential, you know, kind of free cash balance. So thank you.
Definitely.
Mark, you had a question?
Yeah, I have a question, revenue-wise projection for FY26. So the new fire engine's coming in the spring, I think. So we'll be selling the old one. Do we have any idea what the range would be for selling the old one?
I'm not usually involved in the selling of the assets. It's usually the procurement office. Sometimes they trade them in. It just depends. So I couldn't answer that. I don't know off the top of my head. I could find out.
Yeah, because I think, it's probably pretty substantial. I think usually what we sell, used dump truck's not gonna get much, but I would think that fire engine would. And that, Sharon, that does flow through revenue, right, when we sell an
Yes,
asset?
it would be. It would be like
Right.
gain on the sale of fixed assets, yeah.
That'd be good to know in this budget cycle what we estimate that, because it's,
It's one of those things too that doesn't happen every year, and so it's not, it probably isn't projected to be a specific number in our fiscal 26 budget. It would be going right to free cash. When we do sell something and we get revenue related to it, we're not expecting that revenue flows right to free cash.
but I think if we're looking at what we need to use free cash and we're gonna have a substantial amount, we should have an idea of what that's gonna be or a range, so.
Yeah, I can find out. Are we ready to move on to that free cash analysis spreadsheet, just to give it a quick overview?
Looks like it, yes, please.
Can you see it on your screen?
Yes.
So I compared, 8 options where you can play with the numbers, but essentially the first one shows you a 3.5% operating budget. And let's just kind of go over how to read this. That would probably be a good too. So we start with our certified free cash, and then what our favorable variance or our combined regeneration is from operations each fiscal year. And then what uses of free cash that we had or are planned. And then down below, we show our stabilization funds, our reserves, and giving a grand total. And then projected revenues, 3% increase is assumed. So when it comes to this, I'm taking where we are and I'm assuming 3% increase each year over, to get to the revenue number that we are going to use as our 7% reserve limit. So we'll take 7% of this projected revenue that's increasing roughly 3% every year. So you can see in this particular example, I'm assuming in fiscal 25 a $3 million regeneration number, and I put in what we would need for a 3.5% operating budget and what it would be in each year going forward for a 3%, a 3.5. I'm just putting rough numbers in there just so you can see, like, when do we fall into the category that we are going to drop below the 7, and that is at that fiscal 28 in this scenario. Now this is if all we regenerate is 3 million. So these are so that you can kind of play with this and see, I might be being overly conservative, and you might feel like, well, 4 million seems safe to me. We've been doing a 5-year average of 6. So that's why I kind of gave you several options. I gave you a 3.75, a 4%, a 3.25, a 3%. And then this one is a 3.5 with 4%. $4 million regeneration instead of a 3. So that you guys can kind of look at it and see, what do you realistically think, based on what you've seen, could potentially be our regeneration? Our average is 5.9 for the last 5 years, and it's 5.1 over the last 10 years. So you might feel comfortable with the 5. But each year we're going to probably have this conversation because it's going to be tight until we decide to do something in the line of an override. So these are using different levels of free cash and regeneration numbers so that you can feel that out. Like, what if we really did continue to regenerate 6 million? Well, then we're in good space.
Yeah. Even the 5, if I'm reading this right, it was analysis 7.
Yeah.
It's a 3.5% operating budget increase for but then also for the next 2 years, but 5 million regeneration, and we're fine. We go off the end of the spreadsheets. It's not quite a 10-year projection anymore, but even the 7-year projection, we're still in the black all the way out to the end.
Yeah,
So-
and if that were to be true, if 5 million was the number, and it could very well be attainable, 2031 is the last year we are scheduled to pay on the pension, and 2032 would be a year that we would see a reduction in our pension assessment if everything goes as planned. If we could hold the line that long, then some of that funding that we would be paying towards pension could be reallocated to OPEB and to other things within our operating budget. It's just the unknown of what the real regeneration is going to be and how the economy is changing right now, and going from an inflation environment to seeing interest rates fall. Just not knowing what the future holds because it's not consistently what we've seen in the last few years.
I want to make a correction to something I just said. This spreadsheet says we're fine, but this spreadsheet also assumes that we suddenly stop supplementing the budget, like the amount by which we supplement the budget goes down.
Yeah, I'm noticing that too. I hadn't looked into that. That could be worse than it is. So if that were the case, it'd be wonderful, but
it's not.
it's not. So this spreadsheet has been traditionally used the last few years, given to FinCom to kind of play with as they're trying to consider where their comfort level is in the use of free cash in the operating budget. And so it's kind of just there for you to kind of play with. I must not have finished this slide. So that actually is probably not going to be in that favorable, because we wouldn't drop to 4 million.
It pushes us back.
Unless I was thinking that this would be where we had the override, that for 29, we'd have an override to bring it down from the 9.4. But still, even, I feel like when we had the first override and it was, 7-point-something million dollars, that one failed. Smaller override, so that's another thing to consider.
All right,
Because the smaller override was more feasible for people than the bigger one. And so that we have to consider our timing in that regard as well.
So Sharon, we don't have in this though, the reimbursement on the Killam School for the money we will get back, right, from what we already
You
paid?
mean the rebates for
Is it
the,
Probably about 2 million or so, Tom?
2.2.
no, we don't have any of that in there.
So that,
Get that when construction is done then?
yeah, that
So
should be.
it's kind of unknown what year we would even get that.
Yeah, it's gonna be out of way.
So that would be a helpful part of, help us extend out, longer, because it would give us an infusion that could be used towards operating budgets. It's just not clear when we would get it.
But I think it should be in this spreadsheet, so we're not, it's a significant number that we're not taking into consideration if we're gonna say we need an override, but there's 2 million that could push that out a year or two, so. What do you guys think? Is it 28 that it's gonna be done, or?
I was just asking Carol that, if you project it at the end of construction as a worst case scenario, is
We
that
should get back before then.
20, let's just say end of 2027, so you put it in the 2028 money, maybe?
On a text, I'll text you.
Ed?
Sharon, on this, we're back to not contributing any more to capital, right? We're back to like our original percentage?
Yeah, we're back to our 5%. We're not doing an additional 700,000 anymore.
Thank you.
Tom?
Closer to the mic this time. We think we talked about this in the past, but 7% is your policy now, right? But the bond agency is like 10%.
No, it's a range, 8 to 10 per
We have
division
that.
of local services.
Indeed, and we have an agenda item to talk about what our policy should be, because that discrepancy, I've noticed that discrepancy as well.
So if we were to look at this, whether it's 8 to 10, it's more than 7. So if you look at it from a 10%, that falls us back even more, unfortunately. And that's gonna be one thing if and when we ever get an override, it's always gonna be something that people are always like, you have so much money in free cash, but when you think about how it actually impacts your ratings and other things like that, you don't have as much free money as people think you actually have.
Especially when you're trying to borrow.
Right.
It's not just for Killam,
rates-
it's
Killam,
the
senior center,
center,
whatever else we may
We're
have.
always-
We wanna keep a good
We're
rate.
always trying to borrow for something, so yes. I think we're on the same page there.
I guess my point was it'd be good to see like a 10% line too.
Yeah, that's I think that's I haven't done that with my latest copy of the spreadsheet that Sharon sent me, but in previous, like, last year, I tried changing that 0.07 to a 0.1 to see what I got and where we fell into the, red there. I mean, it moves things like 1 year, one way or the other, but it does move it by a whole year. So. All right, let's see, checking no hands on Zoom. Sharon, did you have more you wanted to present, or, I mean, I guess.
No, I just wanted to make sure that you guys knew how to use the spreadsheet. I know that we've used it in the past. I didn't know if there was anybody who hadn't seen the spreadsheet, but it definitely will help you kind of hash out some figures in your mind and figure out where your comfort level is.
Thanks, Sharon.
Oh, Jeffrey.
One question maybe for the school committee to answer. So you just signed a bunch of contracts, right, with the new unions, and that's by far the largest chunk of your budget is all the salaries, right? So if we look at what the operating budget needs to increase by year, can you kind of ballpark that based on the contracts that, you know, the increases that are mandated by those contracts? I mean, clearly some staff will retire and new younger staff will come in, but I mean, is it kind of 3%, 3.5%? What's the change in the operating budget that we need to be trying to sustain?
I don't know if Dr. Milchowski's back, he had to step away to take a call, but we should have that information for you within the next couple of weeks before your next meeting. We're in the process of reviewing the multi-year forecast to make sure we have a good understanding where we're going to be. As of this time last year, when we were having those conversations with you all, it was in the lower range of what you're talking about. We want to make sure that we're still in that same place. So as of this time last year, it was like 2.75 we were comfortable with. We gotta validate that and make sure that's in fact the truth. So maybe Tom did join in, so.
Yes.
Yeah, I think we expect to have that information all, kind of more fine-tuned before the next FinCom meeting, October 9th. So we're just, kind of refining some of our numbers on our end too. So thank you for kind of hanging in there until then.
Definitely don't want to make any decisions before we have that info.
We appreciate that. Some of the things, just a couple of things that have been just moving pieces for us too on that have just been sort of the in and out of staffing over the summer and just making sure that our model has all of our up-to-date staffing and projecting that out as well. And also some of the shifts in special education, particularly out of district placements as well, making sure that that's as accurate as possible too.
All right, so actually looking back to the agenda, so we have an agenda item to discuss policies, and we have an agenda item to discuss possible use of free cash. We've kind of already started on discussing possible use of free cash. Maybe we should pivot to talking about the policies next. Let's see, I'm not sure how this should work. I could present them, presumably. Let me see about doing that. Where's my Zoom window? Why can't I find my? That's weird.
Are you trying to find the policy on cash reserves?
No, I'm trying to find my Zoom window, which got like really small. I got it. I found it. I swear I know how to use a computer. Here we go. I'm sure that's not going to be legible yet. It's not bad. It's in a ginormous font, which just helps. Hold on, I want to close that. Makes it a little bit bigger. So, on the Finance Committee website, we have 4 policies listed. There's a policy on cash reserves, policy on debt and capital, OPEB policy, and our peer community benchmarking policy. The one that's most obviously relevant to the discussion we're having right now about free cash is the policy on cash reserves. So we've talked about it's currently 7%, with sort of an additional threshold of 5% requiring formal review, although we review the budget all the time, I thought. That's okay. And then, the definition of cash reserves does include free cash, stabilization funds, and the FinCom reserve fund. It does not include sale of real estate funds, overlay reserves. Presumably, it wouldn't include anything else like Nice.
Special ed stabilization.
Special ed stabilization or ICRE.
Yeah, committed stabilization.
So, Tom Wise beat me to it. We have heard the observation before, and maybe, I'm not sure if Sharon or someone else can comment on this. People have more insight into the part where we borrow money. But I understand that, our AAA bond rating is, on the one hand, very good for us because it's reducing the amount of interest we're paying. And that we have heard, and now I'm trying to remember my sources, maybe in a past financial forum where we had the presentation on municipal finance, that there was a,
Local services.
yes, I think we had someone from Division of Local Services present, and they noted that the bond rating agencies like to see 10%. So I'm curious what people have been thinking about it. I'll put this out here as a discussion item. Ed?
So Joe, just out of curiosity, so, again, each of these are dated, and I think it predates, when this was done, it kind of predated all of us. It would be interesting, like, when it was last updated in 2016, and for some of these other ones, what was the process that, and I don't know if anyone knows that, like the process that we went through, because I think that would be, I think we're probably past due, and in at least looking at it and seeing if it just needs to be updated for, whether it's a percentage or just, kind of reviewing all of it, from that perspective. But I think from a context perspective, it would be interesting to know, like, how we went about that. Was this something that we let, we relied on information from the town to be able to do that? Was it a subcommittee of finance committee that looked at something like this? So and without kind of knowing some of that, those details, I think it's tough to be able to say, oh, we should do X, Y, or Z.
Go ahead, Jeffrey.
I think to Ed's point, yeah, I mean, what were the bond rating agencies telling us then? We were at 5, we went to 7, were they saying 10 then? We're like, no, we'll go to 7. Or they were saying, were they saying, they had been saying 5 and then they said, oh, now 7's a good idea, like, okay, we'll go to 7, and now they're saying 10, like, okay, we'll catch back up to them, or, are we following them, or were we, where did that number of 7 come from? And I guess, to the extent that we have a AAA bond rating with the 7%, well, I guess we have more than 7% now, so maybe that's what we have 20% now, right?
Yes,
So,
or 18,
so,
but
yeah.
nothing to sneeze at.
Okay, so,
Yeah, we've never had 5% in reserves since I've been here, but that's what we had as a policy prior, and we slowly increased it to 7. Bond rating agencies won't quote you what they want what the percentage is they consider to be healthy, but it seems like the auditors will point to 10% or more.
correct me if I'm wrong, but I think in around 2000 or so, we had like 100,000 in free cash. And like
In 2000? Oh, yeah, it was like
early on, yeah, we had
really early on, it was
less
very
than 1 million, there we
low.
go.
A million,
Yeah.
so we
Okay.
used a zero, but it's still
Yeah.
fewer zeros than we have now.
Yeah. What was our bond rating then in 2001?
We got our AAA bond rating in 2012 or 2013, like shortly after I got here, we got our AAA bond rating. I think we were AAA plus or, AA plus, I think, I'm not sure. But we were upgraded around 2012, 2013.
Mark?
Sharon, does, what RMLD, if they take on debt, does that impact our bond rating too?
From what I'm told, no, because they're able to pay that debt from their business operations. It doesn't impact us as a town, even though we own it and we'd be on the hook for it, if they probably borrow it under us. because they are a well-operating establishment and are able to build it into the rates and be able to pay the debt themselves, I don't believe it's going to impact anything related to our bond rating, based on what I've heard back from our bonding agent.
John?
Sharon, are other communities' bond ratings public? Is there a way that we can kind of look at what other communities are rated and what their free cash situation is, and see if there's kind of a threshold that we should be looking at?
You know, what the
There
factors
is a
are.
data bank at DOR that you can see comparative data. I'm sure they show you free cash, but I'm not sure about bond ratings, but yes, I think that's what's on the screen right now. You can compare, our debt level, all different types of factors with other communities.
Yeah. I'm not gonna go try to find it, especially because the small print is illegible. But
Yeah.
this information, somewhere in here, you can see everybody's bond ratings, both with S&P and Moody's. I'll switch back to, Karen.
Yeah, that's a great question. I was poking
Nice
around
intro.
the site. I know it's in there. I think Chelsea has a AA bond rating. I mean, I don't wanna say it's great inflation, but, I think a lot of communities have really good-looking bond ratings these days. And maybe that has to do with the fact that it was really easy to borrow for a while, so that could change. But, that might be a way to approach it, is to look at a number of parameters. The other thing that always sticks out to me is that we've been diligent about paying and building an OPEB database, OPEB reserves, and I see a lot of other communities not making an effort, and some are like us, so that might be something to do, a multi-pronged approach, to pick a couple of parameters and see how we're doing. My first go-to, although this isn't gonna solve any major problem for us, is to, if we felt like we needed more cash, to back off OPEB, we already talked about reducing capital if we needed to, and we're talking about programs that will replace capital like the Community Preservation Act, like green communities. So, that might be one way to look at it, to kind of have like a number of metrics that we would look at and feel like if we're in good shape, then does that mean that we need to change? I think we don't have a debt policy. I thought we were advised to have when I say a debt policy, is it, how much outstanding debt we have for a community? I think that might be something that we don't have, that we could consider to be a new thing going forward.
So these are all AAA.
I think we do have a debt policy, but I don't think it draws a line of exactly, they like the way we handle debt in terms of we pay our debt off quickly, we don't, but we don't actually say, okay, anything over this much money you borrow for this long, 10 years, or, like a range. We don't give that kind of guidance in our debt policy. That's
Yeah.
the only thing I could see that they would like to see, is like to see that different managers would approach this in the same way that we've done in the past, which is try and pay our debt off in a very short time frame. That is very favorable to bond rating agencies. Our debt is considered pretty low compared to our peers, and so and the auditors always comment on it at the audit committee meeting, how little debt we carry. So that's definitely one thing they'll comment on. The only thing that they would look at to change is like having specific parameters so that every manager does it exactly the same. Every manager is going to have their different approach to how they deal with debt.
Yeah, I was thinking more of a town level, and this usually comes up at the MMA conference in the financial meetings, and I'm not remembering exactly what that was, but the last time I sat in one of those, I was like, oh, okay, it's not just a reserves policy. There are 3 or 4 other policies that we hadn't implemented exactly, and we could consider doing that too, as maybe just guidance. But so that's coming up in January, and we'll be able to register really soon for that. Thanks.
Joe McDonough has a hand up.
Yeah, just really quickly, it's just a data point, but I did find this Mass Department of Revenue site that has like a report for 2023, which shows like the average of like 8.6% for other Mass communities. So again, it's just like an average, and like I don't see, it doesn't necessarily like link it to the bond rating, which I think is really important, but it's just another data point. So
Mary Ann?
Yeah, and just to answer John Sullivan, on Standard & Poor's Global, I was just going here, you can find a list of US municipalities with AAA ratings, and it's sorted by state. So when you scroll to Massachusetts, you can see what communities are there, and then you could compare them to whatever our peer group is. I think Joe is putting that on the screen now, or you're putting on something
I
similar?
found the DOR one,
Yeah.
Sorry, at
But
the
like-
same time that you said that, I
Right,
finally found this
like I can
one.
see that, Andover is there, but, and when Wakefield is there, but North Reading is not, Stoneham is not, Reading is. So you can kind of say, okay, who's in our peer group and is on this AAA list? This is a 2022 list. Sounds like Joe has something too.
So, alright, I just dropped something into my notes. Okay, so what am I hearing so far? I'm hearing some talk about process, looking into how this was decided before, doing some research on how bond agencies make their decisions so that we understand the implications of if we went to 7%, and said, nah, we don't need to think about override yet, would something bad happen or not? That's the question. Thankfully, we have enough free cash right now. This is not a question that has to be answered by, even by next year, but it might need to be answered by 2028 at the rate we're going, so.
Is this something better to answer after we get the numbers on Killam and a possible senior center, just in terms of knowing, okay, you'd be asking for an override, but taxes have already gone up this much to pay for these. And then like Mark said, with knowing the money coming back, is this just something we could answer better in a year? Cause we'll at least have the answer for Killam by next year. I don't know.
I think it's a little bit, those are valuable data points. I think I think our policy should be event agnostic,
Okay, yeah.
in my opinion. It should be, we should have whatever the policy is, it's, and we can just as easily just keep it the same. I don't think it's,
Yeah, I was
It's
thinking of it in
important.
terms of the override decision, but
it's important to understand, the events, but I think, for us, for some of the stuff, it should, that's just my opinion, is that, those are all interesting data points, but from a policy perspective,
Yeah.
it's some of it's more to what Jeffrey was saying, is like, when we made the decision at 7, what were the facts at the time?
When you say event agnostic, do you wanna take into account the prevailing interest rates too? I mean, those could be a bit, those trends could be.
Yeah, there's so many layers to the onion, how much were our revenue, so if you talk about interest rates, well, how much were investment income part of our revenues, so it's, there's a lot of pieces of it that I think are, kind of interesting data points, but I do think it's, you can get really deep into this, or, do we, I think it's be helpful to understand, like, what kind of parameters are we looking at? And I think it's, if we're working our way back from, what makes, what's important to us, setting, the AAA rating, obviously is important. But like, what are those factors? And then we work our way back to how that, kind of dictates from a policy. And I think that seems to be, kind of, to me, a logical way to be able to look at it. But, but it's tough to kind of, jump into this while the car's moving. You know what I mean? Like, in some sense, it would be good to be able to understand how we did things historically, so that we can, kind of have a baseline and move forward.
I can comment. Part of why I put this on the agenda is because the car is not yet moving. We are even in the more pessimistic projections, several years away from some of these tough conversations, which is why I want to talk about it now and not then. That actually, in response to Marianne's point, I think you're asking exactly the right questions that we should be asking ourselves when we come up against the policy and are deciding what to do. Do we stretch for 1 year, or do we ask for an override a year sooner or a year later, that kind of thing? I think it's totally fair to take into consideration, what other things are going on in town, what other, how has the tax burden outside the levy changed, things like that. Those are totally the right things to take into consideration for that. But for the policy, I get what Ed is saying about that's the thing that doesn't change.
I mean, and again, to some degree, I think there is probably a little bit more sense of urgency to be able to look at, and less so about what Sharon presented, but you know, everything kind of fits together in the sense that, you know, we have a healthy free cash balance, but there's also a lot of demands on free cash, you know, and you know, so if you take $5 million off the top of our free cash number to use for a one-time capital project, then that changes everything. And so so I think it's having a sober, you know, kind of look at what this policy and what that that percentage should be. And again, we may just ratify it and say we're fine with where it's at, but I think having that settled and updated, I think would help inform other requests that come to look at free cash use.
So we have to have a fixed number, because I was looking back in FinCom minutes, and back in 2016, when they were at 5% and deciding to go to 7%, some members were proposing the idea of a range. And I don't know if we are allowed to have a range.
I mean, a range. Oh, go ahead.
If we have a range, isn't that the lower end of the range is just the policy? That I guess the minimum.
And it's even, like, if you look at the policy now, it's 7%, but action isn't required unless it goes to 5%. So 7% has no teeth anyways, you know?
What is the maximum of the range mean anyway? Like, we need to spend off the
I
free
was like,
cash because we have too
quick,
much and.
put a bunch of money in the common and light it on fire. No.
Back in 2016, the comments were that the auditors were, bond rating agencies were looking at least for 7%.
Okay.
And back then, this was 2016, I'm reading the minutes, the committee currently has a 5% policy, but the auditors would like to see a document stating this, and the committee may want to consider making it 7%, which is what bond ratings agencies look for. And that's from the June 29th, 2016 Finance Committee minutes. I was just searching in the past when this board has discussed bond ratings.
There's nothing like a real-time researcher like yours.
Well, now we know where the 7% came
Exactly,
from
it's perfect.
anyway.
It's perfect. It's perfect. I mean, so stringing that logic out, then I think it's definitely worth it for us to be able to, you know, and again, it's 8 years old, you know, at this stage anyway. So I think we're probably overdue to look at it, and but I think it's those same type of facts. Sharon, like, I know we recently had audit.
It didn't come up.
It didn't come up. I was gonna ask Mark and or Sharon if it came up. Is that something that we can engage them on, you know, kind of now, and just ask the question, to see if they're, you know, and again, because they have an interesting perspective in working with other communities, if that's.
Are you referring to the auditors or
The
the bond
auditors.
rating agencies?
The auditors, sorry, apologies, yeah, the auditors.
So we're due to have our audit committee meeting coming up soon, because our auditor left, so it's been delayed. So they left the firm, and so we still haven't had our fiscal 23 audit committee meeting, so we certainly can have a conversation. I could reach out to our auditors and get a range of what they think is a healthy reserves position. But that's also something that's coming, is a more detailed discussion about our financials with the auditors, and they usually will give opinions based on what they're seeing compared to the peers that we have and what they're seeing at their other clients in terms of reserves levels and all of that.
Thanks, Sharon, that's perfect.
Mark, Doctor.
Thanks, folks. I think as you're reviewing the policy and things also, it's worth taking a look at what the intent was. So what you have on the board right now, the August 2016, the second paragraph, last sentence. Policy on cash reserves is designed to protect the community from sudden and unexpected changes in revenues or expenses. So if that truly is to remain the mission, I think that's different from some of what we've been doing over the last several years, which is kind of, you know, buffering things and somewhat funding the operating budget through this. So it may be that that definition isn't quite right, or it may be that that definition is right, and we need to kind of take a look back and say, wait a second, when you're talking about $5, $6, $7, $8 million, it's not against sudden and unexpected changes. In fact, it's against expectation. And maybe that's indicating that, wow, that's not why we had reserves set up here. That's not why we were trying to hold X percent of revenues as reserves. Reserves against what? Reserves against unexpected changes or something else. So just maybe that should be part of the discussion, the mix, thinking that through a little bit too.
No, I think that's fair. I think that's a important thing, and I think we would be doing ourselves a disservice if we just started with the stuff in bold and stopped there. I mean, we should look at the whole policy, and I think, again, situations, that existed in 2016 were in a much different situation in 2024. So if we only talked and did something about the percentage, I think then we would be doing ourselves a disservice and, maybe even arbitrarily setting something, setting ourselves up in one way or the other. But looking at the entire policy and I think there's things in here that, that should be edited. And I think, the line that Mark brought up, I think we look at cash reserves a lot differently in 2024 than we did in 2016. So I think that's probably why, we need to have the discussion on the reserve percentage.
I do notice the existing policy, is not throwing the money in the pile in the comment as I suggested, but it does almost say, one of the things that would happen would be go ahead and spend it on capital projects. But it also says supplement the current fiscal year budget, so.
Right, that's the last bullet.
And in practice, that's of course what the, largest amount of, I haven't thought to do this math yet, but off the top of my head, I'm pretty sure that a large fraction of all spending out of free cash over the last 8 years has been supplementing the operating budget. And that's even taking into consideration that we've had several big things like Killam and so forth that were, over 2 million, but.
So Joe, how do we move forward with this?
Mark Doxter, your hand is still up. Is that
Just
old or
raise
new?
So a new quick question, if I could sneak into the other discussion that I remember when I was on FinCom, and I think you folks have had it since then also, is that we do have a category called stabilization fund. And part of the discussion has always been, well, how much should be in stabilization? Because maybe that's what we're talking about in terms of the unexpected kinds of things versus the other. And right now, the stabilization fund, I don't know that we've added much, if anything, to it in quite a long time. Sharon, do you remember if we really add anything to it? I think it's been fairly.
I believe it is the money that was put aside for not the last override, but it came from the override prior to that, put in the stabilization. We've not taken it out, and it's grown based on, interest and investment earnings.
Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, when we talk about total reserves, it's part of total reserves. And the biggest difference, as I understand it, is what level of town meeting vote is required to move funds. So where free cash, I believe, requires a majority, I believe that stabilization requires a 2/3 or something similar. I think that's a distinction. So anyway, that's part of the reserve discussion also. So sorry, I just wanted to throw that in, and then I'll butt out.
It does seem like the current distinction is a little bit arbitrary. Jeffrey.
Just to actually kind of counter what you were just saying, that the largest part of free cash expenditures has been for supplementing the operating budget. Given that we're regenerating it, it's sort of like, we've only actually spent it for that, like the 2.2 million for the Killam. That's really the only thing we spent. There were some other smaller
in there,
things, so,
right?
yeah.
I picked, these were expenditures, they weren't net expenditures.
Right, yeah.
Net has been increasing every year.
Yeah. So it's sort of, it's more of a, we don't have to work so hard to get the budget numbers perfectly correct, because, okay, we've got the free cash that kind of lets us borrow, kind of on paper, borrow the money, and then we put it back in because, we didn't, we look at the taxes or the auto excise tax, we don't have any idea how many people are going to buy a car. We could sit there and really try and get detailed information about how many people are gonna buy a car and what that's, and do a much better prediction so that we're much closer in there. But it's like, well, okay, we could, but we don't. We just say, yeah, we think we make a pretty good estimate, and then we say, look, we're gonna supplement with free cash that we then regenerate.
This is the, you know, I don't know, that elephant in the room. The way Reading finances operating budget is our uncharacteristically large regeneration and uncharacteristically large offsetting use of free cash to supplement the budget.
I mean, that guy from the Division of Local Services that came and gave us the presentation said, oh, you should never use free cash to balance your operating budget.
We're like, we've never not used free cash. But also we've never, you know, we haven't, you know, it's been years since we had less regeneration than we spent, so. Karen?
Just anecdotally, City of Salem has a self-reported 23 had a AA bond rating and a policy that their stabilization fund would contain 5%. So I don't know what our stabilization policy is. I think we said we don't have one. We just have money in there. But I think that's what Mark's saying then. So we could, other communities, Salem's a great just example. Like, do we need a AAA bond rating?
It's
And
nice.
what are other successful
Sure is
communities doing? Yeah, but you know, Sharon can ask our bond issuers, like, what do you get in a couple of hundred the percentage points versus like, we wanna use funds for what the taxpayers want in the best way possible. So, but the City of Salem Annual Comprehensive Financial Report is an interesting approach. They take a little different approach, and that's a city versus a town, but we could be a small city.
Don't go there. All right. So yeah, okay, so Ed was starting to talk about next steps, which I think I was going to if he didn't beat to it. You know, we have a bunch of options here, I see. I mean, one is, of course, this was an interesting conversation and edifying, and we won't do anything because, you know, the bond rating is not, you know, is good and the balance is greater than this, and it's not broke, don't fix it. On the other hand, there's sort of the opposite extreme. We could open the question wide open of like, well, actually, let's like distinguish free cash from reserves so that free cash is actually free, and we can think about that as free cash for decisions like, you know, Birch Meadow phase whichever, or that kind of thing, you know, the next, you know, these sort of, you know, modest capital projects, still small compared to the big ones, but, yeah, so I don't, I mean, is there interest in having a subcommittee look at this, or is there interest in just talking about this again next year?
I think we should keep it on the budget. I think we should keep it on the agenda, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
And I think we should, I think this is something, again, my opinion, is that if there's, I'm not opposed to having a subcommittee, you know, do some of this work. Or it may just, if there isn't a sense of urgency and we don't need it, then we can just do it as a committee. And we can just have it as a, you know, kind of a, you know, something that we just work through on our side, and, you know, and we have it as part of our agendas.
I think it would be good to hear from Sharon whether, you know, what the auditors think of the bond rating, because we might not need to do anything.
Mhm.
Now, anyway, if they're saying we're fine, so.
No, I don't wanna have to make a last minute decision where we've been saying 7% is fine for years, and then we realize we're gonna ask for an override a full year earlier because it's not. I don't wanna surprise people with an override. I don't wanna ask for an override, period, obviously, but like, surprise is only makes it a lot worse. Tom?
Just a minor suggestion, you guys can take it or leave it as the case might be. You all may know the school committee for years didn't do policy review. For years. And we established a subcommittee for intentionally that purpose. And since then, we've gone through 40 policies. So, you know, and we have 150 on the slate for this year. So there's a lot. But I find that it's a lot more productive when you have 2 or 3 people working through policy change and then bringing that as a proposal for the rest of the committee to talk through, rather than have 9 or 10 people or 8 or 9 people go through it and fine tooth comb it. for every little change you want to make. So just from a productivity perspective, you may find if you actually want to really look at this and make changes, that you might be more effective with 2 or 3 people that are focused and passionate about it to come back with a suggested change for you all to look at and make small tweaks from there if necessary, but then vote on that first.
That's fair. That's a good point. Deciding to do it as a large group is, to some extent, deciding to do less. Because in practice, the large group will not do as much. I think that's my hypothesis, and I think that's in line with what you're saying. Jeffrey,
You said we have, what, 4 policies though?
we have 4 policies, so like it's not, yeah, no, we're not,
At the
it's,
school
committee, yeah.
yes.
Unless we need to create any additional policies, but
Well,
probably
but-
don't.
We could create an awful lot, still have way fewer. All right, anyway, okay, we're getting a little off the rails here. So, all right, so let's,
I think Mark brings up a good point. Let's, I think, there's still time to take Tom's suggestion and do something as a subcommittee, but again, let's get some of the information from Sharon, from the auditors, and that can help kind of crystallize things for us, whether there's a kind of an urgent need or to be able to do it. But I think that's, and then we should have this discussion too with the full committee too. We should have, kind of Emily and Indri here as well, and so that we have, whatever we decide to do, I think we should do it in front of the full body.
no, as I said earlier, I'm trying not to do anything in a hurry.
Yep.
Starting earlier, I'm one of those people who spends too much time at airports but never misses planes. So, all right, take a look at the next policy on our list of policies. Make this a tad bit bigger. Debt and capital. This explicitly came up actually at our last meeting, in the context of, holy cow, everything is more expensive. And by everything we mean things like DPW trucks and police cars.
Paving materials.
Paving, oh yeah, it's true, asphalt. Since then, we've gotten the, I'll say sobering, information about how much free cash support is needed just to maintain, a 3 or 3.5% budget increase. And that's without moving additional, because what came up last time that partly prompted putting an agenda was, we did 5.5%, not 5% for how many years? 5
For capital?
for capital.
I want to say it was 4 years.
4, at least
It
4.
wasn't that long.
Okay. So the question was whether we would want to institutionalize that, like make that permanent. Counterpoint is that if we did that, then we'd have 5.5% less in the operating budget, and everything gets that much tighter. Or we have to spend that much more free cash per year to make it all add up. So what, do people have, I just went ahead and shared my thoughts. I'm curious what other people's thoughts are on this. Including Sharon's, because I know you were the one who talked about the 5.5, 6.
I don't think it's as urgent. I wasn't expecting we'd look at it for this year. And who knows? I mean, I feel like with the interest rates going down, maybe we'll start to see some of the pricing coming down, who knows? But I feel like it just puts more pressure on the operating budget to put more towards debt and capital right now. Especially we don't know, when we'll go for an override and when we'll have any, because we're using so much free cash just to have a normal operating budget. If you were to increase this above the 5%, it would make it worse.
Yeah.
And we are managing, so it just means that some things get pushed out a little bit further. Like if something's typically replaced at 10 years, we might get it done by 12 or 13 because I'm having to force things outward. When the costs are going up, maybe some of the costs will start to normalize.
2018.
It's hard to know. Every time I sit with a group regarding capital, DPW has a lot of trucks, equipment. I'm shocked at what the increases are that they're getting from quotes from vendors for trucks and the lead time it takes them to actually get a truck, or even a fire truck for that matter. The increase in price from what it was to what it is now, you just have to think it can't continue to keep going up like this. So, but to change this right now, I think would only make our need for free cash more, which would lead you to an override faster.
Man.
Just one part of this that I was looking back, you know, when this was enacted and looking now, and given, you know, things are different than 2018, and the sentence we have here, exclusion from the tax levy should always be considered for capital projects over 5 million. Is that 5 million, should that still be the number? I mean, given that projects have changed in cost, so we, like I think about what I saw on the select board a meeting or two ago with the Lower Haven project, which I've, in past votes, I've not been a fan of as a FinCom member, I'll just say that. And that they're going to quote, ask town meeting for 8 million. So per our policy, does that mean we need to have exclusion from the tax levy for that Lower Haven project? Because that's an 8, you're gonna have to ask town meeting for 8 million. And we have a policy of nothing over 5. And so I'm just wondering, is the 5 number not realistic in 2024, 25?
I feel like if you put anything more than $5 million inside the tax levy, you really hurt the operating budget. You cripple the operating budget and make it so they're not able to do capital inside the levy because the debt becomes too high. I wouldn't, if anything, I would say 5 million or lower, like maybe 4 million, but I wouldn't make that number higher because I feel like the bigger that number is, the more difficult it is to get capital done within the operating budget.
You're gonna say something?
No, I agree with her.
Yeah.
You might wanna lower it because then,
Okay, so then I guess that's
Then-
gonna be interesting when that Lower Haven
well, then
project
the
comes up.
residents get to vote on it, you
Yeah.
know, so it's,
Because they're saying they were gonna go out to bid in the winter, but I didn't hear anything about a vote. Okay,
I mean, that's a, we're getting, we're supposed to talk about the town meeting warrant next time.
yeah, no, I know, but
This has to be something that we've already thought about,
right, I'm not trying to deviate from the agenda, but seeing that number,
Grants and things like that that come into play, but we can talk about it.
right, but that number, seeing this number on the policy just makes me think of projects like that,
Yeah.
that come to us.
And I just say that the $8 million number that you're mentioning is news to me. I'm wondering if some portion of that was supposed to be grant and then
yes.
Right.
local share.
But
So I don't think our share of what we would have to put into that project would be that high, but so when you mentioned it, I was kind of stunned. I'm not sure what I don't think the borrowing that I have on my books is $8 million, so
it was supposed to
if
get
there's updated numbers, I haven't gotten them yet.
a 2.2 million complete streets grant, but that still is greater than 5?
Was it 2.6 million MassWorks grant?
Or was it 2, Masswork, I'm sorry, I
Yes,
misspoke.
and-
And there's still
and-
maybe a federal earmark
There's a-
coming in
hoping
that
to get a
we're
federal
waiting
earmark,
on
right.
as well, so.
So, it's,
So we just put the total amount, but there's also grants that come off of that.
But is town meeting authorizing the total amount then?
They always do, the way we do the warrant article is that it's borrowing, you know, we list all the ways that we could get there, and then we figure it out.
I
is
see.
that on the November one?
Yes.
so
But we
I'll be
won't
on-
know about the federal earmark then?
We're hoping, you know, probably, maybe, you know, we've been monitoring it and hoping to get some more information on it, so.
Oh, okay,
But we're not
Sharon, well,
totally counting on it, so.
then I didn't wanna get Sharon concerned, it's just when I heard the number
Yeah.
and read about it, and I said, well, that's
No,
8
you're
million.
right, that was the number that Ryan said, but that includes a lot of other things.
one thing I want to add here, the policy does say consider, or not, obliged necessarily. If it were, $5.1 million and it made sense to borrow it inside the levy, we're free to do so if we think that's the right thing. But by the same token, we're not also nothing's stopping us from considering it for smaller capital projects either, for that matter.
Yeah, no, and
Um,
it doesn't say must be considered, it just says should,
So,
so that can stay.
yeah, and we considered it. We said no. That could be the result of consideration. The other thing, actually, I'll make one more connection before it sounds like we're going to move on from this policy because it doesn't. We do have we are considering the Community Preservation Act, which would fund projects that would otherwise be sort of small capital projects. So that might be another thing that takes some pressure off of the capital part of the budget and makes the 5% go a little bit further. Open space projects are getting paid for through that, for example. So another reason not to change it. All right. So there's the OPEB policy, which nobody has talked about. Actually, nobody prior to this meeting has talked about changing. We did have a comment about the fact that we could in fact contribute less if we were really in a pinch one year.
I think in the last few years,
Sorry,
there was, you'll probably recall, you made
Zoom
temporary.
folks probably can't hear you.
Oh, sorry. I'm just recalling the last few years, this body made some temporary decisions to back off the OPEB funding and then restored it.
We did,
Remember
yes,
that?
yeah. This year at least. I'm not sure about other years, but definitely this year.
We thought it might have happened before we passed the 2018 override too, I'm not sure that.
We definitely did back off the number and try and bring it back up, but I think if you recall when we were building the budget last year, after we finished accommodated cost, Maya told us what our rate was gonna be and we needed a little more extra in that health insurance line, so we took it from the OPEB. Because it's meant to be kind of a hedge, the way we do it. We put the 500,000 in there for OPEB, and then we don't put it into the trust fund until April in case health insurance, just to give us a little buffer for health insurance in case health insurance. Because when we're building this budget, we don't know enrollment, we don't know where our rate of increase is gonna be. There's a lot of variables that we don't know. And in most years, since I've been here, I feel like the access in health insurance has gone into the OPEB trust, not the other way around. But in the last couple of years, we have had to bring the OPEB contribution down a little bit because of health insurance increases.
Alright. Yeah, I don't see a change that there. Alright. The other policy which is listed separately from the others is, and actually it's funny, we don't have a policy per se, we have it's listed as policy. The link on the webpage says policy on peer communities. The actual, what it links to is a list of the peer communities.
Which could be an interesting list to revisit.
Yes, so this is, especially because it has been a while since October of 2013. On the other hand, I don't know, towns only change so fast. I suppose some of these towns have had considerable commercial development since the last time, or since 2013, and that might change their shape. But yeah, so just putting this up here, that we have our list of 23 peer communities that was determined over.
2008, actually.
Oh, okay. Well, so it was.
Yeah, 2008 was when Stone
Oh, the consulting was done then, and then, yes.
Determined our peer
Yeah.
communities.
Yes.
So it could use an update.
Statistically similar.
Yes, and I mean, it's yeah, I mean, we don't actually have the criteria that the consultant used all those years ago, I'm assuming. So it's hard to,
Are you asking me to look?
I mean,
How long will
I'm
it take you
teasing
to
you.
find?
yes, I mean,
There's gotta be.
I mean, I'm sure it exists as a public record somewhere, but it's might be quite the dig to find it. But it is, I mean, this could be if this were generated by a list of rules of like, oh well, the population should be within this of our population, the fraction of residential property should be within this comparable to our fraction of residential property. The income, obviously, comparable. you could plug those numbers in and get those rules in and see who falls in that category. This is another one that I don't see as urgent because, for one thing, we're not making a bunch of huge decisions. And people occasionally like to point to this list when making arguments about things, but there's nothing binding about it on how we spend money. Last time I used this list actually was in the context of the CPA committee, where I found that somewhat unhelpfully, exactly half of our peer communities have adopted CPA and half haven't. So that's not a very. I think actually it's an odd number. But the Winchester is there. So if Winchester adopts it, it'll go from just under half to just over half.
Well, I found when
All right. Wow. Ooh, some familiar names there too.
yeah, so it was May 22nd, 2013, FinCom discussed the report by Stone Consulting identifying peer communities by various statistical comparisons. And Mr. Doxer said he would like to compare school, DPW, and public safety data with other communities. Mr. Berman, are we spending added technology? So some people on the finance committee then, asked about other factors, but it just said by various statistical comparisons. So.
You're not telling us what the statistical comparisons are is an excellent way to make us have to hire them again or hire someone else again if we ever want to revisit it.
Maybe that if maybe they discussed, this is the minutes, so maybe during the meeting, if a recording existed, slides might have showed, whoever was recording the minutes might not have gotten all the details, but we don't need that, or maybe there was a report. So,
Tom?
schools have their own peers.
Well, yes and no. We do have our own peers, if you look at DART, as an example. So if you wanted to think about what you're saying, Joe, in terms of other characteristics. But I would suggest or ask that you look at this before the next round of negotiations. So you have 2 years essentially to do that. As you know, this was instrumental in our examinations. But you do see some pretty big outliers in this list. Burlington is a huge outlier.
Oh, yeah,
in
they
this list
spend a
versus everything
fortune on
else.
schools.
Right, both from a size, but also from a commercial versus residential basis, and that drives everything hugely off base. Our Andover's a pretty large outlier as well. Winchester's a pretty large outlier. As much as we'd like to think they're similar, there's other dynamics there. So it's interesting to try and figure out how you would classify that. But some of the categories you said, Joe, were some I would think about as too. Is the commercial residential split is a big one. Medium household income is a big one. I would list like approximate distance from Boston as a big one as well, because some of these are in different places in that space. So that also impacts like the population that you're dealing with. Maybe demographic type mix of some sort might be an interesting one to look at too, both from a pro and a con, but just something to think about as you go through that. But if you'd be willing to look at this over the next couple of years before the next round of negotiations, I think that would be a good time stamp to kind of look at it from an endpoint.
That's good. That's good input. Thank you. That's what I did. Well, it's not a thing we have to do right away. This is actually maybe the policy I'm hearing the most questions about in terms of does it need to be revisited or updated? I mean, I suppose the policy itself says that updated studies are suggested to keep the list up to date, and I don't believe there has been one, or maybe there was one in 2013, and that's why that's the date on here. But even that's a long time ago.
It sounded like reading some additional minutes from that year. They just wanted to establish something so that people couldn't switch the communities from year to year, to make it match something. There had to be a consistent benchmark.
Without a policy, you could definitely cherry pick your peers for whatever argument you're trying to make. So yeah, don't want that.
But I'm sure that study was not done for the finance committee, in 2008.
No,
So-
the human resources director was presenting it, so that I've seen it cited, some of the things cited for comparable staffing in Reading versus peer communities, just in some of the minutes over, you can look at like the decade years, so they use it for various comparisons.
But yes, as Tom mentioned, it is used in it
The
comes up in
negotiations.
negotiations when trying to, you have to be aware whether we're ahead or behind our peers in these dimensions. Joe?
Yeah, it might be a question for Tom, but like, in terms of what the school uses, does that have some of that criteria that Tom highlighted? You know, demographics, like commercial, residential breakdown? I mean, should we look hard and compare the schools versus this list of communities?
Schools use your community list. We don't create our own necessarily. The DESI does create its own comparison list for us, and that's the DART tool, so Marianne knows that like the back of her hand. But that is another potential source you could use to try and drive some of these peer communities, as well as look at DESI DART as one of your inputs. But we don't use anything ourselves other than this list. So when we're looking at things as a comparison, we use this list. We do sometimes add and other Middlesex communities, because that's the athletic district we're in. So sometimes you'll see a slight addition because of other Middlesex communities, but for the most part, this list is our list.
But DESI would have some of the additional criteria?
I'm not exactly sure how DART does their list, but I think it's probably somewhat like we talked about, Joe, in terms of demographics, in terms of town size, in terms of school size, although there are some interesting DART ones they have that are like half size of our community. So there's a
Yeah, like
there's a science, there's an art there more than a science as far as I can tell, too.
Okay, thank you.
Joe, just, is Mark and Crystal on, because they'll have to,
Wait, hold on.
Is Karen?
Arlo,
Mark is still here.
So Karen just left the room, so
Yeah.
do you still have quorum?
we did not, they do not have.
They do not have quorum. Is Karen coming back? Did she step out for a moment or is she gone?
She took her purse.
I think she
so
ran,
I think she
you know, I think she was.
Get me away from these people. All right.
Hard out.
By default, they're adjourned.
Okay, then in that case, I'll give the select board an opportunity to adjourn.
So, sorry, are there actually 3 members on?
There are,
Carl
no.
and Chris were on, right?
So I think we've.
It was-
Oh, is
adjourned the
Carla
topic.
here?
Carl was on too.
Carlo's not on anymore either.
Oh, okay, all right. I don't have the list in front of me because of, and I don't know, be unsurprised to learn I use Google Meet rather than Zoom at work. So I'm actually not a big Zoom expert.
Can I just quickly ask, Chris and Carla, you guys on?
Scroll down and see people. I guess.
I'm on Mark. I don't think anyone else is.
So I think it's the 2 of us. So I think we have adjourned de facto.
Okey-dokey.
All right, okay. All right, so moving this along here. So it's, what I'm hearing is we definitely want to be thinking about the peer communities benchmarking. It'd be nice if we had the guidelines like it says in the title. And
Even
then-
just to see the size of their municipal budget compared to us, if it's a community, it's much larger than us.
Yeah,
I don't know.
Some of these have much larger budgets than us nowadays. I don't know if they did in 2013 or not. All right, I'm going to stop screen sharing. Get the participants back. All right, so going back to the agenda.
Joe, is this a good time to give you an update on Killam?
Was it-
So,
To your question?
so Killam's actually not strictly on the agenda tonight?
No, to answer a question that
Oh, the question, thank you, yes. Sorry, that specific question about when that money that would return to free cash potentially.
Yes. Carl Indazaro, Lawrence Road. So, we receive monthly from our OPM invoices that we submit through our ProPay system. Sharon submits it, and we get reimbursement from the MSBA every 30 to 60 days. We've gotten 4 to date. So that just as a recap, our total project cost to date is $548,432, and the eligible costs are $252,005. That's at a 45 almost 46, 45.95% reimbursement rate, which will not be the reimbursement rate we will have later on. So that's where we're at. We've had four payments from the MSBA. So we'll get those throughout. Right now, we're 9 months into the feasibility and schematic design phase, which was why that $2.2 million was appropriated. We still have until February of 2025 before that period ends. So we're still gonna be carrying out that 2.2 million through February of 2025. If that answers your question. We're not gonna get like $2.2 million that's gonna be returned to us. We're gonna get proportions of that along the way.
So have we paid 2.2 million into the state already?
No,
No?
we pay our bills we pay our project manager bills as they come in, and then we apply for reimbursement.
Over.
That's,
Yeah, so it's not it's not been a complete one-time overlay and it's not a one-time reimbursement, so it happens over time.
Sharon, does that come in in revenue? She's still there?
So I spoke to DOR about how to handle the reimbursements, and what I was told was to set up a capital project fund for the feasibility money, and then the revenue coming in from MSBA would go there, and then whatever's left over after the feasibility study is complete could be used towards the total project as part of the, when we go for the total project, we would net that amount against it. So it is not in the general fund. The reimbursements have been going to a separate fund that is all about Killam's feasibility study.
Okay, and then it sounds like when after February 2025, that fund would just go in towards, the overall cost of the project would be reduced, but that'd be applied towards the project rather than returning to free cash.
Yeah.
So there isn't.
Yeah, I mean, I think that when we write up the article for town meeting for the project, we would show the funding sources as being, so much borrowing, so much coming in from the MSBA, so much from what we have remaining from the feasibility study. And I do think we have some other projects that have remaining balances, like I want to say the library project, where we might have money that we would tend to want to move around to help fund, because you have to use them for similar projects. So the library would be something similar, a similar building project, and we could use whatever access is from the library there. So we'll go through all our capital projects that are complete and see what accesses that we could close into these projects.
That's good to know for the discussions on free cash. There's not a free cash windfall coming there. It's going towards Killam, which is a fine thing to do with it, obviously. Good to know for planning purposes. All right. Okay, so going back to the agenda for tonight. We have the opportunity to talk if there's anything else people have or anything further thoughts people have on the possible use of free cash to support the budget. We've actually been discussing that for most of the last 2 hours, but opportunities, people have points that have not been made.
I think the question is how much do we need to support the increases that are in the contracts is an important question that we have to have answered before we know what we need to set that increase to the operating budget.
We are going to pay what our contracts say we will pay. We're going to honor our contracts. That's not a question. So knowing what that is would be useful. So, all right.
No, I mean, we could say, school department, you can't have it. You've got to cut some positions, right? So yes, we will pay the contracts, right? The
Right.
yes.
But right.
How many of them
Yes.
is, and that's that's the question you have to say. Like, yes, we want to preserve level services versus level funding, right?
Yeah.
We want to continue to provide these services, so therefore we support using a little extra free cash in order to make sure that we can continue to provide those at the contracted increases.
Could have gone sideways there.
All right. so, segueing into future meetings and agendas. There's, I guess, so 2 future meetings to talk about, one of which is listed in the agenda, and the other is actually the sooner one. We are supposed to meet on October 9th
That'll be the warrant.
to go over the warrant and to vote our guidance on the use of free cash. So we'll certainly want to, invite anybody who's got information about, we'll have Matt, we may also want to have Dr. Mojewski. If you've got, those, I know you're getting numbers together there, so we just said we want to have them. But yeah, that'll probably be, I don't imagine we'll have much room on that agenda besides those 2 things, although I don't know how many big financial items.
Not many, not big financial items. There's some of the regulars that we do every November.
Sweet.
The
We pay the
first,
phone bill or whatever.
right, yeah, the first 5 or 6 articles, 4 or 5 articles.
Yeah.
And then, the borrowing one that we talked about for Haven Street. So I'll have that ready though. The select board's set to close it next Tuesday, so.
Then we have our second financial forum scheduled at the end of October, as mentioned earlier. Sorry, I got confused there when you were talking, Carla, because that's where we would love to get an update, from the school building committee on the process of Killam. I know that we know a lot more than we did the last time we talked about it in May. And, a lot of people, residents want to hear about. Really, everybody wants to know what it's going to cost. I don't know how much certainty we'll have about that at that point, but any information you all have, we'd love to get.
Is that October 9th?
No, that's October 30th. And then likewise, we'll presumably, where are we actually having has a committee, a recal building committee been formed from the
Yes.
permanent building committee? Okay.
So it's the permanent building committee plus 2 members, and that constitute the recal building committee.
Yeah. All right. So they're obviously not at the same point in the process, but we can ask them if they have anything they want to share about their project.
Yeah, we're just in the process of bringing on an OPM.
Mhm.
They just voted for the contract last meeting this week, so we're negotiating that right now. So once the OPM's on board, we'll have more information.
We could at least find out about the OPM.
Yes, sure, yeah.
So Joe, October 9th and then 30th, right? Am I?
That's correct.
Yeah, let's make sure I have that.
So, yeah, where's the
Kids right. Thanks.
that is, I think that is consistent with what's the schedule on our website too. Though I'm opening it right now just to keep myself honest, and yes. So, are there other topics people wanna, I'm guilty of a last minute addition to this one myself because someone asked me about the Burbank Ice Arena Fund, and so I added the thing at the last minute for Sharon to share that information. Are there other things people want to talk about, or people can also obviously think of ideas between now and then?
I don't know.
So, all right. Switching back to the agenda again. All right, so now, if we actually had a big audience to come hear presentations about buildings or whatever, I'd invite them to leave. I think on Zoom, a lot of people already did. This is the part where it's going to be more conventional meeting stuff. Yes.
I request that you take the next item out of order before you do your liaison reports.
Oh, okay, yeah, no, I think that's fair. We have an agenda item to select a finance committee member to participate in school department screening committee. Tom, do you want to talk about that?
Sure. Hi, good evening, everyone. So the community may know Dr. Derek Pinto has transitioned to serve as the Assistant Superintendent for Finance in the Lowell Public Schools. So we're in the process of searching for the next either Director of Finance or Director of Finance and Operations for our district. We'll post both. Posting closes Friday, and are looking to get sort of the screening committee put together so we can start to get candidates in for the screening process. So as we've done in the past, we'd love a representative from FinCom to serve on the screening committee. I talked to Joe, and Joe thought it made sense to bring it up to the committee tonight to have a discussion and make sure that you can put a name forward.
And then I think, I'm doing this from memory from your email, but I think the first time commitment was Tuesday,
Yes, this coming Tuesday, 12 to 2 is the first commitment. We do expect it to be a pretty light commitment. I mean, I think at this point of the year, we do expect a smaller pool. So we do have that time on the calendar for Tuesday, given that we're already working around schedules for a school committee member, our internal team, and a few others too. So that window of time would be the first one, and after that, we nap out the others. So Tuesday, the 24th, from 12 to 2.
So, who's interested?
I'm interested. I'm available Tuesday, although the end of that week I'm a little busier. Actually, I'm out of town for Parents' Weekend at the end of the week. So I don't know, Tom, if you other than Tuesday, would it be then later in that week or?
No, probably the following week, because that's there's a few of us who have other commitments that week. So that's really the only day that's available next week. So we're trying to get things started, and we'll see how it goes after that. So that'll be the only commitment that week.
I'm bad luck, so I'm gonna the last couple.
That's great. All right. I mean, that's okay. I mean, I know Marianne and I've talked about it. And,
No, I said I'd do it, but I have jury duty, so pity the jurors. I mean, the defendants or whatever.
There are other people here who go to more school committee meetings than me, so I wanted to defer to them. So I wasn't, I didn't put my hand up, but. Mark, looking at your calendar.
Yeah, I'm traveling the end of the first week in October, so.
Okay, so that might be a problem too.
Yeah.
So. All right.
Do we need
Formal. Yeah, I mean, I don't know if we need a vote, but I also don't see any harm in.
Some appointments are just made by the chair, so.
That is true. I have no idea how that works here.
It
think
just
you
said
take- I just think
select, you got a lot of
Yeah.
weasel room here.
I just
All
think you take the gavel, yeah.
All right, okay. All right, okay. So in that case, let's, especially because it's not a hard choice, let's just appoint Jeffrey by acclamation or by the chair or by whatever's procedurally correct.
Thank you.
And so, cool. All right.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Corum. I'll email you more details this week. So we'll keep the rest of the FinCom posted as the process moves forward. So thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Joe.
Yeah, no problem. Makes perfect sense. All right. So liaison reports, are there updates that people would like to share with the committee?
I don't know. I was waving goodbye to them.
Oh, yeah, he's just saying bye.
I
Just
don't
being
have-
polite.
I don't have any either.
Okay. So,
You good?
Oh,
You were looking expectant.
CBDC, I guess, looks like they're gonna propose 2 MBTA communities options to town meeting.
all right.
That's
They got another meeting tomorrow night to hash out the language. You were at that meeting, I was there for part of it. And I think they wanna have a primary and a backup is the way, and it seems like they're leaning towards South Main as the primary and existing developments as the backup. And it was hard to follow everything with select board, but I already mentioned the $8 million Lower Haven project. And there was some good news of a new business if you are into whiskey coming to I'm not, but many are, a light manufacturing business coming to General Way. I think it's called the New England Barrel Company, right?
Yep.
And so what was interesting is they're not before the select board yet, even though I'm the select board update, but that'll be their next stop. They were before CPDC to just maybe get signage permits or other development aspects.
There's a use waiver, yeah, I
'Cause it's
followed this, and I promise it's not just because it's about whiskey.
great.
You've already said too much, Joe.
Yeah, it's all right. Cheers. So, because it's commercial, and I think it's actually, the activity is actually considered light industrial.
And also then there was the issue of, okay, well, they might have tastings and they might try to bring in local restaurants. So I don't know if you get the board of health, involved with serving food, those were mentioned.
Yeah.
Some people mentioned, asked questions about fire hazards of storing all that whiskey there and how much is gonna be there, but also it was brought to their attention that they do have to go to the select board to get a liquor license
Yep.
as well. So that's just something new when everyone says, oh, there's nothing going on over General Way, and when I saw it on the agenda, I thought, oh, is the the liquor store changing there? No, this is like, and it's not really necessarily a competing use. Cause I looked and that liquor store sells this brand of stuff too, so it's more like one of their suppliers is also moving in.
Synergy.
That's awesome.
Alright. Yep. Yeah, I did, I know I'm not officially one of the select board liaisons anymore, but I did watch the select board. Partly because I was trying to figure out what the select board wanted from the CPA study committee. CPA study committee, speaking of which, did meet last night to go over slides that we'll present to the select board next week. It's already reported via Carlo, our liaison, that November ain't gonna happen. If you didn't know, the deadline for that was the beginning of this month. That wasn't, so you don't actually need me to tell you that because it didn't happen. So what we're asking the select board to extend our charge, which is currently the committee set to sunset at the end of the year. But we'd like time to actually research this question properly, so.
And just one last thing, and I forget when was the last time we met? Did we already mention that they're gonna be buying the trash containers in the spring? And I see a headline, I'm cheating by looking at the Chronicle headlines to refresh my memory, so to be honest. It said select board informally authorizes purchase of 96-gallon recycling containers, which is something bigger. So I hope we don't hear that, town meeting authorized a certain amount of money to buy all these containers, that inflation is gonna hit that and we're gonna have to.
No, that's gonna be in line, we're already talking
Good.
to the vendor, so that will be an issue.
That's it.
All right.
Oh, and RCTV is moving, but people know that, right?
I did know that. Not
Maybe the
really.
public does it. Whoever's watching on RCTV does it. Moving down the
We
street.
don't have an RCTV in the liaison. We don't directly interact with it. They're not dependent on us. So, all right. If no one has anything else, our only remaining order of business is to look at the minutes. Give people a chance to pull that back up on their respective devices.
Checking that.
Ah,
hiding in the background this whole time.
Oh yeah, she's stealth, awesome but stealth.
Yep.
And stealth. It's probably not a bot.
see if I'd reread the minutes, I'd remember that I already told you all about not going to CPA in November.
They looked fine to me.
All right, then I'll entertain a motion to approve the minutes of August 21st as presented.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you, Ed, thank you, Mary Ann. All right, roll call vote, Scott, Joe. Joe McDonough?
Oh, abstain?
Oh, okay, fair. Jeffrey Corum,
Yes.
Ed Ross,
Yes.
John Sullivan,
Yes.
Mark Zero,
Abstain.
Mary Ann Downing,
Yes.
and Joe Kernan, yes. Is that?
5 right there.
Oh, yeah, we did have enough, yes. That's true. Strictly speaking, if we had too many abstentions, we wouldn't actually have a majority of the whole committee. All right. So in that case,
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
thank you, Ed. Thank you, Mark. Joe,
Yes.
Jeffrey,
Yes.
Ed,
Yes.
John,
Yes.
Mark,
Yes.
Mary Ann,
Yes.
and Joe, yes. Thank you all.
Nice job to you two.